The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Riverside County Superior Court as Emma Chun clutched her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, against her tiny chest. Her pink sneakers, decorated with glittery unicorns, squeaked against the polished marble floor with each hesitant step. The 3-year-old had no comprehension of the gravity surrounding her presence in courtroom 3B that Tuesday morning, nor could she possibly understand that her next few words would ignite a firestorm that would consume an entire police department. Detective Sarah Martinez watched from the gallery as the child's grandmother, Mrs. Lee Chun, squeezed Emma's hand reassuringly. The elderly woman's weathered face bore the weight of 6 months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and the constant fear of losing custody of her granddaughter. Mrs. Chun had been caring for Emma since her daughter's tragic death in a car accident 2 years prior, and now she faced drug possession charges that could tear their small family apart forever. Judge Patricia Williams, a mother of 3 herself, adjusted her reading glasses and offered Emma the warmest smile she could muster. At 62, Judge Williams had presided over countless cases involving children, but something about this tiny witness touched her heart. Perhaps it was the way Emma held her teddy bear, or how her dark eyes seemed to take in every detail of the imposing courtroom with curious innocence rather than fear. "Good morning, Emma," Judge Williams said gently, her voice echoing slightly. "In the high-ceilinged room. Thank you for coming to see us today." Emma looked up at the judge with wide eyes, then whispered something to Mr. Buttons before nodding politely. The packed gallery, filled with reporters, law enforcement officials, and curious onlookers, collectively held their breath. This was supposed to be a routine identification, nothing more than a formality in what prosecutors considered an open and shut drug case. Prosecutor Daniel Kim, a rising star in the district attorney's office, approached the witness stand with confidence. He had built his career on meticulous preparation and attention to detail. The case against Mrs. Chun seemed ironclad. Police had found methamphetamine hidden in her apartment during a search warrant execution 6 months ago. The drugs were discovered after Rex, a highly trained German Shepherd police dog, had alerted to their presence. Emma had been present during the search, playing in the living room when officers arrived. All Kim needed was for the child to identify Rex, confirming she had seen him that day. "Emma, can you see the courtroom today?" Kim asked, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "Do you remember when some police officers came to visit Grandma's house?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small fingers stroking Mr. Booton's warm fur. "The loud men came," she said in her tiny voice, barely audible despite the courtroom's perfect acoustics. "They scared Grandma." "That's right," Kim continued, trying to keep his tone gentle and encouraging. "And do you remember if there was a doggie with the police officers?" At the mention of a dog, Emma's face suddenly brightened with the natural excitement any 3-year-old shows at the prospect of seeing an animal. She stood on her tiptoes, scanning the courtroom with eager anticipation. Her eyes found Rex immediately. The magnificent German Shepherd sat perfectly still beside his handler, Officer Brad Thompson, near the prosecution table. Rex was an impressive specimen, his black and tan coat gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. At 4 years old, he was in his prime, weighing nearly 90 pounds of pure muscle and training. His alert ears were perked forward, and his intelligent brown eyes surveyed the room with the keen awareness that made him supposedly one of the department's most successful narcotics detection dogs. But something unexpected happened when Emma spotted Rex. Instead of the simple "yes, that's him" that everyone expected, her expression changed dramatically. The excitement drained from her small face, replaced by something that looked remarkably like concern, even sadness. She tilted her head to one side, studying the dog with the intense focus that only small children possess. "Why is the nice doggie here?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Is he still hurt?" The question hit the room like a thunderbolt. Prosecutor Kim blinked in confusion, glancing toward his notes as if they might contain some explanation for the child's unexpected words. Defense attorney Michael Rodriguez, who had been preparing for a routine cross-examination, suddenly straightened in his chair, his legal instincts immediately recognizing that something significant was happening. Officer Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw clenching almost imperceptibly. Rex, as if sensing the tension, turned his massive head slightly toward his handler, though his well-trained discipline kept him in position. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean hurt, sweetheart?" she asked, her maternal instincts overriding judicial protocol. Emma looked directly at Rex, then back at the judge, her expression grave beyond her years. She pointed one tiny finger toward the German shepherd with the precision of someone identifying a suspect in a lineup. "The doggy was scared when the loud men came to Grandma's house," Emma said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He didn't want to go into the scary room, but they made him anyway." The courtroom began to stir uneasily. Mrs. Chun looked confused, whispering something in Mandarin to her court-appointed translator. Detective Martinez felt her stomach drop as a memory she had tried to suppress suddenly came flooding back. "The doggy cried like when I fall down and get hurt," Emma continued, oblivious to the growing tension around her. "The mean man hit him with the long stick when he wouldn't listen." At these words, Officer Thompson's face went visibly pale. His hand instinctively moved toward his duty belt, where his collapsible baton usually hung. Several reporters in the gallery began scribbling frantically in their notebooks, sensing that this routine hearing had suddenly become something much more significant. Defense attorney Rodriguez shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess too." But Emma wasn't finished. With the brutal honesty that only children possess, she looked directly at Officer Thompson and said, "Why did you hurt the doggy? He was just trying to be good." The silence that followed was deafening. The silence in courtroom 3B was so profound that the faint hum of the air conditioning system seemed to roar. Every eye in the packed gallery was fixed on the tiny figure standing at the witness stand, her unicorn sneakers barely touching the floor, her stuffed bear pressed tightly against her chest. Emma Chun had just asked Officer Brad Thompson why he had hurt the doggy, and the weight of her innocent question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything. Defense attorney Michael Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken as his 23 years of legal experience kicked into overdrive. He had walked into this courtroom expecting to go through the motions of a routine drug case, perhaps negotiate a plea deal, maybe get his client into a treatment program instead of prison. But this 3-year-old had just handed him something he had never expected, a potential path to complete vindication for his client, and possibly something much bigger. "Your Honor," Rodriguez said, rising slowly from his chair, his voice carefully controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, "I believe the witness has raised some very serious concerns that warrant further exploration." Prosecutor Daniel Kim scrambled to his feet, his perfect case suddenly feeling like it was built on quicksand. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is 3 years old. Children of this age are prone to fantasy and overruled," Judge Williams said sharply, her maternal instincts now fully engaged. She had watched Emma's demeanor throughout the brief testimony, and there was something about the child's matter-of-fact delivery that rang with truth. "I want to hear what the witness has to say." Emma looked around the courtroom with the confusion of a child who didn't understand why the adults seemed so upset. To her, she was simply answering questions about something she had seen, the way she might describe what happened at preschool or what she had for breakfast. She had no concept that her words were threatening to unravel careers, destroy reputations, and potentially expose a corruption scandal that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. "Emma, sweetie," Judge Williams said gently, leaning forward in her chair, "can you tell us more about what you saw happen to the doggie?" The little girl nodded earnestly, her dark hair bouncing with the movement. "The doggie didn't want to go into Grandma's bedroom," she said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "It's scary in there because it's dark and smells funny." But the mean man kept pushing him and yelling. Officer Thompson's jaw muscle twitched visibly. Rex, sitting beside him, seemed to sense his handler's distress and shifted slightly, his intelligent eyes moving between Thompson and the little girl who was describing his ordeal with startling clarity. "What did the mean man look like, Emma?" Rodriguez asked, though he was careful to keep his distance from the witness stand. Children could be easily intimidated, and he needed Emma to feel safe enough to continue talking. Emma studied the courtroom, her gaze moving past the prosecutor, past the court reporter, past the gallery full of strangers, until it landed squarely on Officer Thompson. Without hesitation, she pointed directly at him. "Him," she said simply. He had the shiny thing on his shirt like a star, and he was very loud and angry. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Mrs. Chun, sitting in the front row, covered her mouth with her weathered hand. She had no idea what her granddaughter was talking about. During the search of their apartment, she had been so terrified and confused that she had barely paid attention to what was happening around her. Detective Sarah Martinez felt her stomach lurch. She was sitting in the third row of the gallery, having come to observe what she thought would be a routine conclusion to a case she had helped build. But Emma's words were bringing back memories that Martinez had tried desperately to suppress, memories of that day 6 months ago, when she had watched her colleague lose his temper with his K9 partner. "What did you see the man do to the doggie?" Judge Williams asked, though part of her was beginning to dread the answer. Emma's expression grew sad, the way children's faces do when they remember something that upset them. "He had a long black stick," she said, holding her hands apart to show the approximate length. "He hit the doggie on the back and said bad words. The doggie made crying sounds like when I cry when I get hurt." The courtroom erupted. Reporters began frantically typing on their phones and tablets. Several spectators gasped audibly. Rodriguez felt his heart racing. If what this child was saying was true, it meant that evidence in dozens, possibly hundreds of cases, could be compromised. "The doggie tried to run away," Emma continued, oblivious to the chaos her words were causing. "But the mean man grabbed his neck thing and pulled him back. Then he hit him again and said, 'You better find something or else.' I didn't know what that meant, but the doggie was shaking like when I get scared during thunder." Officer Thompson shot to his feet, his face flushed red. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The testimony of a 3-year-old who was traumatized by a police action cannot possibly be considered reliable. Children make things up all the time." But his outburst only seemed to confirm what many in the courtroom were beginning to suspect. Judge Williams banged her gavel firmly. "Officer Thompson, you will sit down and remain silent unless I direct. A question to you," she commanded, her voice carrying the full authority of her position. "And I remind everyone in my courtroom that any outbursts will result in removal." Emma, startled by the sudden noise and angry voices, began to tear up. She hugged Mr. Buttons tighter and looked toward her grandmother for comfort. "It's okay, sweetheart," Judge Williams said softly, her voice returning to its gentle tone. "You're doing very well. Can you tell us what happened after the man hit the doggie?" Through her tears, Emma nodded. "The doggie was very scared, but he went into Grandma's room anyway. He kept looking back at the mean man, like he was afraid he would get hit again. Then the doggie started digging in Grandma's closet, but he was still shaking and crying." Rodriguez realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. A 3-year-old child potentially exposing what could be systematic abuse of a police canine and, by extension, corruption of evidence in drug cases throughout the county. And after the doggy was digging in the closet, what happened then? He asked gently. He found Grandma's medicine box, Emma said innocently, referring to what prosecutors claimed was a container of methamphetamine. But I don't think the doggy wanted to find it. I think he was just scared of getting hit again. The implications of Emma's statement hit the courtroom like a bomb. If Rex had been coerced through fear and abuse to alert on command rather than following his training, then every arrest, every conviction, every search warrant based on his alerts could be legally challenged. Judge Williams looked at the chaos unfolding in her courtroom and made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to take a recess," she announced, banging her gavel once more. "And I'm ordering an immediate investigation into these allegations." Emma Chun, still holding her teddy bear, had just potentially brought down an entire police unit with nothing more than the truth as seen through the eyes of a child. Detective James Walsh sat in his unmarked sedan outside the Riverside County Police Department headquarters at 11:47 p.m., staring at the manila folder that could either make or destroy his career. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few patrol cars and the distant hum of the night shift settling in. Walsh had been a cop for 23 years, working his way up from beat patrol to detective, and he had never faced anything quite like this. Earlier that day, he had received the call that every internal affairs detective both dreaded and lived for, a potential case of police misconduct that could shake the department to its foundation. Judge Williams hadn't wasted any time after Emma Chun's explosive testimony. Within 2 hours of calling the recess, she had contacted Police Chief Robert Hayes directly, demanding an immediate and thorough investigation into Officer Brad Thompson's handling of his canine partner. Walsh rubbed his tired eyes and opened the folder again, reviewing the preliminary evidence that had been hastily gathered in the 8 hours since the courtroom bombshell. The Chun case file was surprisingly thin for what should have been routine drug bust. The arrest report, signed by Thompson, was remarkably sparse on details about how Rex had alerted to the presence of narcotics. Most canine handlers were meticulous about documenting their dog's behavior, the specific type of alert, the dog's demeanor, environmental factors that might affect performance. Thompson's report simply stated, K9 Rex alerted to presence of controlled substances in bedroom closet, search conducted, methamphetamine recovered. But it was what wasn't in the file that troubled Walsh the most. Every police operation was supposed to be documented with body camera footage. It was department policy, union mandated, and crucial for protecting both officers and suspects in case of legal challenges. Yet Thompson's body camera footage for the Chun search was mysteriously absent, marked only with a brief notation, technical malfunction, equipment failure during operation. Walsh had seen plenty of convenient equipment failures in his years with internal affairs, but this one felt different. The timing was too perfect, the stakes too high, and Emma Chun's testimony too detailed and specific to dismiss as childhood fantasy. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at a name he hadn't called in months. Detective Lisa Patel, Digital Evidence Recovery. Lisa, it's Jim Walsh. I know it's late, but I need a favor. Jesus, Jim, do. You know what time it is? Came the groggy response. I need you to recover some body camera footage that allegedly suffered a technical malfunction about 6 months ago. Can you be in the office in an hour? There was a pause. How big is this? Potentially career-ending for several people, including possibly us if we screw it up. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The Digital Evidence Recovery Unit occupied a windowless basement room filled with computers, hard drives, and the constant hum of cooling fans. Patel, a former computer crime specialist who had joined the force after a successful career in corporate data recovery, was already at work when Walsh arrived. Her multiple monitors displayed cascading lines of code as she attempted to reconstruct data from Thompson's supposedly corrupted body camera. "Tell me what we're looking for," she said without looking up from her screens. Walsh filled her in on Emma's testimony and the missing footage. As he spoke, Patel's expression grew increasingly grim. "Jim, in my 5 years doing this job, I've seen exactly 3 legitimate technical malfunctions that resulted in complete data loss," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "This ... She gestured at her primary monitor. "This is not a technical malfunction." "What do you mean?" "Someone deliberately corrupted this footage. See these data markers? The file was manually deleted, then the sector was overwritten multiple times to prevent recovery. This took time, knowledge, and intent." Walsh felt his stomach drop. Accidental equipment failure was one thing. Cops dealt with faulty gear all the time. But deliberate destruction of evidence was a federal crime. "Can you recover anything? Maybe fragments." "Give me another hour." While Patel worked her digital magic, Walsh decided to examine the other body camera footage from that day. The Chun search had involved 4 officers: Thompson and his K-9, Officer Sarah Martinez, Officer David Riley, and Sergeant Michael Foster. Protocol required all officers to activate their cameras before entering a residence on a search warrant. Martinez's footage was pristine. Too pristine, Walsh thought as he watched it on his laptop. Her camera angle seemed carefully chosen to avoid showing Thompson and Rex directly, focusing instead on other areas of the apartment. Rayleigh's footage was similar, showing him searching the kitchen and living room, while Thompson worked the bedroom with his dog. Sergeant Foster's camera showed him coordinating the search from the hallway, but again, never quite capturing Thompson's actions. It was almost as if they had all conspired to avoid documenting whatever Thompson was doing with Rex. Walsh was deep in thought when Patel called out from across the room. "Jim, you need to see this." He hurried over to find her pointing at a waveform display on her monitor. "I couldn't recover the video, but I managed to extract some audio fragments from the corrupted data. Listen to this." She clicked play. The audio was distorted and filled with static, but Walsh could make out voices. ... Won't go in there ... Double quotes ... Damn dog, better find something ... Then, unmistakably, the sound of impact, metal striking flesh, followed by a sharp yelp. ... Told you to find it, not think about it ... Double quotes, another impact. Another yelp, more desperate this time. ... Better alert, or I swear to God ... Walsh's blood ran cold. Emma Chun hadn't been making up stories. She had witnessed systematic abuse of a police canine, and now they had audio evidence to prove it. "There's more," Patel said grimly. "I've been running analytics on all of Thompson's body camera footage from the past 2 years. Want to guess how many technical malfunctions he's had?" Walsh was afraid to ask. 47. All during search warrant operations where Rex alerted to drugs. 47? Walsh couldn't hide his shock. "Jim, the statistical probability of that many equipment failures happening to one officer during only drug searches is essentially 0. Either Thompson is the unluckiest cop in department history, or he's been systematically destroying evidence for 2 years, Walsh finished. They stared at each other across the computer-filled room, both realizing that Emma Chun's innocent testimony had uncovered something far more sinister than a single incident of animal abuse. This was looking like a coordinated effort to manipulate evidence, potentially involving multiple officers and dozens of cases. Walsh's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it. He showed the message to Patel, whose face went pale. Jim, maybe we should call the FBI. Not yet. We need more evidence first. If this goes federal and we're wrong, our careers are over. And if we're right, and we don't call them? Walsh looked at the audio waveform on the screen, listening again to the sound of Rex being beaten into compliance, and thought about a 3-year-old girl brave enough to tell the truth when adults around her were covering it up. Then a lot of innocent people are going to stay in prison, and a little girl's courage will have been for nothing. He picked up his phone and dialed FBI Agent Monica Reeves' direct line. It was time to blow this case wide open. Officer Sarah Martinez sat in her patrol car in the empty parking lot of Millers Creek Elementary School at 2:17 a.m., her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The radio chatter had died down to the occasional late-night domestic disturbance call, but her mind was anything but quiet. The local news had been running Emma Chun's courtroom testimony on repeat for the past 12 hours. And each time Martinez heard that innocent little voice describing the mean man hurting the doggy, her chest tightened with a guilt that threatened to suffocate her. She had been a police officer for 7 years, following in the footsteps of her father, Sergeant Roberto Martinez, who had served the community for 30 years before retiring with full honors. The Martinez family name meant something in this department. It meant integrity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But sitting alone in the darkness, Sarah felt like she was about to betray everything her family stood for, everything she had sworn to uphold when she first pinned on her badge. 6 months ago, she had been partnered with Officer Brad Thompson for what was supposed to be a routine drug search at the Chun residence. She had been looking forward to working with Thompson. He was considered one of the department's rising stars. His K9 Rex had one of the highest success rates in the county, and word was that Thompson was being considered for promotion to detective within the year. Martinez had hoped that working alongside such a successful officer might boost her own career prospects. But what she witnessed that day had shaken her to her core. Martinez closed her eyes and let herself remember what she had tried so hard to forget. They had arrived at Mrs. Chun's apartment complex at 6:43 a.m., executing a search warrant based on an anonymous tip about drug activity. The elderly woman had answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly confused and frightened by the sight of 4 armed officers. Little Emma had been eating cereal at the kitchen table, her legs swinging innocently as she watched cartoons on an old tablet. Everything had seemed routine until they reached the bedroom. Rex, normally eager and focused during searches, had seemed hesitant, almost reluctant to enter the dimly lit room. Martinez had noticed it immediately. The dog's body language was all wrong. Instead of the confident, purposeful movement she had seen from other K9 South, Rex appeared nervous. His ears flattened against his head, his tail topped low. "Search," Thompson had commanded, but Rex had remained frozen at the bedroom threshold. That's when Martinez witnessed something that violated every principle of police K9 handling she had ever learned. Thompson's demeanor had changed instantly from professional to furious. He had grabbed his collapsible baton from his belt and struck Rex across the hindquarters with a sharp crack that made Martinez flinch. "I said search, you worthless piece of shit," Thompson had hissed, his voice low enough that the other officers in the apartment couldn't hear, but loud enough for Martinez and apparently little Emma to witness. Rex had yelped in pain and fear, but still hadn't moved into the bedroom. Martinez had started to step forward, to say something, to intervene. But Thompson had caught her eye and given her a look that clearly said, "Stay out of this." The beating had continued for nearly 2 minutes. Thompson had struck Rex repeatedly with the baton, each blow accompanied by increasingly vicious threats about what would happen if the dog didn't perform. Martinez had watched in horror as the magnificent German Shepherd, trained to be brave and confident, had been reduced to a cowering, shaking animal desperate to avoid further punishment. Finally, unable to endure more abuse, Rex had reluctantly entered the bedroom and begun searching. But it wasn't the methodical, systematic search of a properly trained narcotics dog. It was the frantic, desperate searching of an animal, trying to avoid further violence. Rex had torn through the closet, pawing at boxes and containers, clearly hoping to find anything that would satisfy his abusive handler. And he had found something. A small plastic container, hidden behind some old sweaters. Martinez later learned it contained less than 2 grams of methamphetamine, hardly the major drug operation the anonymous tip had suggested. But the discovery itself troubled Martinez. Rex's alert hadn't been based on his training or his natural abilities. It had been the result of fear, coercion, and abuse. How many other searches had been conducted this way? How many people were sitting in prison because Rex had been beaten into finding evidence? After the search, Thompson had pulled Martinez aside in the parking lot. "What happened in that bedroom stays between us," he had said, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. "Rex gets a little enthusiastic sometimes, but he gets results, and that's what matters. You understand?" Martinez had nodded, too shocked and frightened to respond. She was still a relatively junior officer, and Thompson had all eyes throughout the department. Speaking up could mean the end of her career, ostracism from her fellow officers, and the destruction of her family's legacy. But now, 6 months later, listening to a 3-year-old girl courageously tell the truth that Martinez had been too cowardly to speak, she felt physically sick. Emma Chun had shown more bravery in that courtroom than Martinez had shown in her entire career. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her partner, Officer David Riley. "You watching the news? This Chun thing is getting out of hand. Thompson wants to meet tomorrow morning before shift. Says we need to get our story straight." Martinez stared at the message, her hands shaking. Get our story straight could only mean one thing. They were going to coordinate their lies, make sure their testimony protected Thompson, and buried the truth about Rex's abuse. Another text arrived, this one from Thompson himself. "Martinez, emergency meeting 0600 hours. Denny's on Highland. Don't talk to anyone about anything until we meet. This is important." The implied threat was clear. Thompson wasn't just asking for her silence, he was demanding it. Martinez thought about her father, about the pride in his eyes when she had graduated from the police academy. She thought about all the victims whose cases might be compromised if Rex's alerts were proven to be coerced. She thought about Emma Chun, a little girl who had told the truth simply because it was the right thing to do. Then she thought about Detective James Walsh, whom she had noticed in the courtroom gallery that morning. Walsh had a reputation as a straight shooter, someone who followed evidence wherever it led, regardless of the political consequences. If anyone would listen to her story and act on it, it would be Walsh. Martinez pulled out her personal phone, not her department-issued cell, which could be monitored, and scrolled through her contacts until she found Walsh's number. She had met him briefly at a department barbecue 2 years ago, but she remembered him as someone who seemed genuinely committed to justice rather than politics. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. Thompson and his allies would destroy her career. She might face retaliation, harassment, or worse. But Emma Chun's voice echoed in her mind. "Why did you hurt the doggy? He was just trying to be good." At 2:23 a.m., Officer Sarah Martinez made the most important decision of her career. She pressed call. Walsh answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Martinez? What's wrong?" "Detective Walsh, I need to tell you something about the Chun case. Something that's going to change everything. Where are you?" Miller's Creek Elementary parking lot. Stay there. I'm on my way. As Martinez waited for Walsh to arrive, she felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. Her career was probably over, but for the first time in 6 months, she could breathe freely. A 3-year-old girl had shown her what courage looked like, and Martinez was finally ready to follow her example. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching. Detective Walsh was coming to hear her confession, and with it, the truth about Officer Brad Thompson and his systematic abuse of K9. Rex would finally be exposed. The reckoning was about to begin. Detective James Walsh pulled into the Millers Creek Elementary School parking lot at 2:41 a.m., his headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate Officer Sarah Martinez sitting alone in her patrol car. Even from a distance, he could see her silhouette hunched over the steering wheel, and something about her posture told him that whatever she was about to confess would change everything about the Chun case. Walsh had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the body language of someone carrying an unbearable secret. He had seen it in domestic violence victims, in witnesses to gang violence, in cops who had witnessed misconduct but were too afraid to speak up. Martinez had that same haunted look, the appearance of someone who had been living with guilt for so long that it had become a physical weight. As Walsh approached her vehicle, Martinez rolled down her window. In the pale glow of the parking lot's security lights, he could see that her eyes were red-rimmed, either from crying or from lack of sleep. Probably both. "Thanks for coming, Detective," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "I wasn't sure you would." When a fellow officer calls at 2 a.m., saying they need to talk about a case that just exploded in federal court, "I listen," Walsh replied, leaning against her car door. "What's this about, Martinez?" She took a shaky breath and reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small digital device that Walsh immediately recognized as a personal recording device, the kind civilians use to record lectures or business meetings. "I recorded everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The day we searched Mrs. Chun's apartment. I had started keeping this recorder on me during searches after I started noticing things about Thompson that didn't seem right." Walsh felt his pulse quicken. What kind of things? Rex's behavior. The dog was always nervous around Thompson, always seemed scared. "I thought maybe it was just Thompson's training methods being more aggressive than most, but then I started paying closer attention. Thompson would get angry when Rex didn't alert fast enough, when he didn't find drugs in the first few minutes of a search." Martinez's hands were trembling as she held the recording device. The Chun search was the worst I'd ever seen. Thompson beat that dog for almost 2 minutes straight, Detective. Beat him with his baton until Rex was whimpering and shaking. And then ... double quotes, she paused, struggling to continue. "Then what?" "Then Thompson told Rex exactly where to search. Not in the way you train a K9 to search systematically, but literally directing him to specific locations. He made Rex tear through that bedroom closet until he found Mrs. Chun's medication container. But it wasn't a real alert, Detective. It was an animal trying to avoid more abuse." Walsh was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "You recorded this?" Martinez nodded and handed him the device. "Everything. The beating, Thompson's threats to Rex, his directions about where to search, and ... double quote." She hesitated. "There's something else. After we found the drugs, Thompson made a phone call. I caught part of it on the recording." "What kind of phone call?" "He called someone and said, 'Package delivered. Chun apartment is clean now.' Then whoever he was talking to said something about payment and next week's list." Walsh felt a chill run down his spine. "Next week's list?" "I think Thompson was getting paid to target specific apartments, Detective. I think the Chun raid wasn't about catching Mrs. Chun with drugs. I think it was about planting evidence to get her arrested. The revelation hit Walsh like a physical blow. If Martinez was right, then Thompson wasn't just abusing his canine partner. He was running a systematic operation to frame innocent people for drug crimes. "Why didn't you come forward 6 months ago?" Walsh asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because I was a coward," Martinez said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Thompson has friends throughout the department. My captain thinks he walks on water. The chief has been holding him up as an example of modern policing. If I had accused him of this without concrete proof, my career would have been over, and Thompson would still be out there abusing Rex and framing innocent people. But today changed that? That little girl," Martinez said, her voice breaking completely. "Emma Chun showed more courage in that courtroom than I've shown in 7 years as a cop. She told the truth because it was the right thing to do, even though she probably didn't understand the consequences. How could I keep silent after watching a 3-year-old do what I was too scared to do?" Walsh studied Martinez's face in the dim light. He had interrogated enough suspects and interviewed enough witnesses to recognize genuine emotion, and everything about Martinez's demeanor suggested she was telling the truth. But the implications of her story were so massive that he needed to be absolutely certain. "Sarah, what you're telling me could potentially invalidate dozens of cases, maybe hundreds. Are you absolutely sure about what you saw and heard?" "Detective, I've listened to that recording every night for 6 months. I know every word, every sound. Thompson systematically abused Rex to force false alerts, and I'm pretty sure he was being paid to target specific people for arrest." Walsh made a decision that would define the rest of his career. "I need you to come with me right now. We're going to the FBI field office." "The FBI?" Martinez looked terrified. "Sarah, if what you're telling me is true, then we're not just dealing with animal abuse or even evidence tampering. We're looking at a conspiracy that involves drug trafficking, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations. This is way beyond what the local department can handle." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty playground beyond the parking lot. Walsh could practically see her weighing her options: stay silent and keep her career, or speak up and face the consequences. "There's something else," she said finally. "Earlier tonight, Thompson sent me a text telling me not to talk to anyone about the Chun case. He wants to meet before our shift tomorrow to get our stories straight, and Riley has been getting similar messages." "Riley was there too?" "Riley, Sergeant Foster, Thompson, and me. We all saw what happened, Detective. But Thompson made it clear that anyone who talked would regret it." Walsh pulled out his phone and dialed FBI, Agent Monica Reeves' emergency number. It was nearly 3 a.m., but cases like this didn't wait for business hours. "Monica, it's Jim Walsh, Riverside County Internal Affairs. I've got a whistleblower who just blew open the Chun case. We need an emergency meeting." As Walsh spoke to the FBI, Martinez sat in her patrol car, finally feeling the weight of 6 months of guilt beginning to lift from her shoulders. She thought about Emma Chun, asleep in her bed, probably having no idea that her courage in court had inspired a police officer to finally do the right thing. Tomorrow, Thompson would expect her to help cover up his crimes. Instead, she would be working with federal agents to expose a corruption scheme that reached deeper into the department than anyone had imagined. The recording device in Walsh's hand contained enough evidence to destroy careers and send people to prison. But more importantly, it contained proof that a 3-year-old girl had been telling the truth all along. As FBI Agent Reeves agreed to meet them within the hour, Martinez started her patrol car and prepared to follow Walsh to the federal building. Her career as she knew it was over, but for the first time in months, she felt like a real police officer again. Emma Chun had shown her what courage looked like. Now it was time to follow her example. FBI agent Monica Reeves stood in the federal building's secure conference room at 4:17 a.m., surrounded by evidence boxes, computer terminals, and a whiteboard covered with photographs, names, and connecting lines that looked like a spider web of corruption. In her 15 years with the Bureau's Civil Rights Division, she had investigated police misconduct cases across 12 states, but nothing had prepared her for the scope of what Officer Sarah Martinez's recording had revealed. The audio evidence was devastating. Not only did it capture Officer Brad Thompson systematically abusing Canine Rex, but the phone conversation Martinez had recorded after the Chun search had opened a door to something far more sinister. The mysterious phone call wasn't just about planting evidence. It was about a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating within the Riverside County Police Department. Play the phone call section again. Reeves instructed her tech specialist, Agent David Kim, who had been working non-stop to enhance and analyze Martinez's recording. The scratchy audio filled the room. Package delivered. Chun apartment is clean now. Yeah, the old lady won't be a problem anymore, ... Next week, I need the Morrison address and the Garcia place on Elm Street. Same rate as usual. Reeves felt her jaw clench as she listened. Thompson wasn't just corrupt. He was running what appeared to be a protection racket for drug dealers, systematically targeting their competition while ensuring his clients remained untouched by police scrutiny. Agent Kim paused the recording and looked up from his computer. Monica, I've been running the metadata analysis on this audio file. The background noises, the ambient sounds, they match the acoustics of the Chun apartment perfectly. This recording is authentic, and it's devastating. Detective Walsh sat across the conference table, his 23 years of police experience evident in the grim expression on his weathered face. Beside him, Officer Martinez looked like she had aged a decade in the past few hours. Her decision to come forward had set in motion an investigation that was already spiraling beyond anything she could have imagined. Agent Reeves, Walsh said, there's something else you need to know. I've been going through Thompson's case files for the past 2 years. Rex's success rate is statistically impossible. Reeves raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Most narcotics dogs have a success rate of about 60 to 70%, meaning they find drugs in roughly 2/3 of their searches. It's normal for them to alert on residual odors or locations where drugs were previously present, but have since been removed. But Rex's documented success rate is 97.3%. That's impossible, Agent Kim said, looking up from his computer. Exactly. Either Rex is the most gifted narcotics dog in law enforcement history, or Thompson has been manipulating the numbers. And based on what we heard on Martinez's recording, I think we know which one it is. Reeves walked to the whiteboard and began connecting more dots with a red marker. So we have systematic animal abuse to coerce false alerts, evidence tampering, potential drug trafficking connections, and civil rights violations against every person arrested based on Rex's alerts. How many cases are we talking about? Walsh consulted his notes. In the past 2 years, Rex has been involved in 247 searches. Of those, 241 resulted in arrests. We're potentially looking at hundreds of people who are falsely imprisoned based on coerced evidence. The magnitude of the corruption was staggering. Reeves had seen police misconduct cases before, but this was approaching the level of organized crime. She pulled out her secure phone and dialed Washington, D.C. This is Agent Reeves in Riverside. I need to speak with Director Harrison immediately. I don't care what time it is. We have a situation that requires immediate federal intervention. While Reeves spoke with FBI headquarters, Agent Kim had been quietly working at his computer terminal. Suddenly, he let out a low whistle. Monica, you need to see this. I've been cross-referencing Thompson's arrest patterns with known drug trafficking routes in Southern California. Look at this map. On his monitor was a detailed geographical analysis showing Thompson's arrests over the past 2 years. Instead of the random distribution you would expect from legitimate police work, there was a clear pattern. Thompson's raids consistently targeted specific neighborhoods while completely avoiding others. Neighborhoods that federal drug task forces had identified as major trafficking corridors. He's not just planting evidence, Kim continued. He's systematically eliminating competition for whoever he's working with. Look at these arrest records. Every single person Thompson busted was a small-time dealer or user. Meanwhile, the major players in those same neighborhoods have never been touched. Martinez, who had been quietly listening to the federal agents piece together the scope of Thompson's crimes, suddenly spoke up. Agent Reeves, there's something else. Thompson always worked specific beats, always volunteered for certain types of calls. And he was constantly getting tips from confidential informants that never seemed to be documented properly. What kind of tips? Reeves asked. Anonymous calls about drug activity, always in specific apartments or houses. The tips were always detailed. Which room to search, what kind of drugs to expect, even sometimes what the packaging would look like. It was like someone was giving Thompson a roadmap to plant evidence. Agent Kim's computer suddenly chimed with an alert. Monica, I just received the financial analysis you requested on Thompson's bank accounts. You're going to want to see this. The screen displayed Thompson's banking records for the past 2 years. His official police salary was $67,000 annually. But his account showed regular cash deposits totaling more than $180,000 over the same period. The deposits always happen within 48 hours of major drug busts, Kim noted. And look at this. He's been making regular payments to a shell company called Riverside Security Consultants. When I traced that company, it leads to a P.O. box, registered under a false name. Reeves felt the pieces clicking into place. He's not working alone. This is a criminal organization with multiple layers, possibly involving other officers, drug dealers, and maybe even people outside the department. Her secure phone rang. It was Director Harrison calling back from Washington. Monica, I've been briefed on your situation. As of right now, you have full federal authority to investigate this case. I'm sending you a task force of 12 agents, and we're activating the Organized Crime Strike Force. This is now a RICO investigation. A RICO designation changed everything. Under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the FBI could investigate Thompson's activities as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise, with penalties that could include decades in federal prison. As dawn began to break over Riverside County, Reeves looked around the conference room at the evidence of systematic corruption that had started with a 3-year-old girl's innocent observation about a scared dog. Emma Chun had no idea that her simple truth-telling had triggered the largest federal investigation in the county's history. Agent Kim, I want surveillance on Thompson, Riley, Foster, and anyone else who was at the Chun search. Full electronic monitoring, financial surveillance, the works. Martinez, you're going to help us build cases against every person involved in this conspiracy. What about the meeting Thompson wants to have this morning? Martinez asked. He's expecting me and Riley to coordinate our stories. Reeves smiled grimly. You're going to that meeting, but you'll be wearing a wire. Thompson thinks he's about to cover up one little girl's testimony. Instead, he's going to hand us everything we need to destroy his entire operation. Outside the federal building, the sun was rising on what would become the most explosive day in Riverside County law enforcement history. Emma Chun's courage had set in motion a federal investigation that would ultimately expose a criminal conspiracy reaching the highest levels of local government. The storm was just beginning. 6 months after Emma Chun's first testimony had triggered the largest corruption investigation in Riverside County history. Courtroom 3B was packed beyond capacity. Media crews lined the hallway outside, their cameras capturing every moment of what legal experts were already calling the trial of the decade. The federal prosecution had charged Officer Brad Thompson with 17 counts including animal cruelty, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and RICO conspiracy charges that could result in life imprisonment. Emma Chun, now 4 years old and noticeably more confident than the frightened toddler who had first taken the witness stand, walked into the courtroom holding her grandmother's hand. She still carried Mr. Buttons, her beloved teddy bear, but her posture was different now, straighter, more assured. The months of therapy with child psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster had helped Emma understand that telling the truth, even when it scared adults, was always the right thing to do. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Kim stood at the podium, her opening statement having electrified the packed courtroom an hour earlier. She had methodically laid out a case that went far beyond simple animal abuse, revealing a criminal conspiracy that had operated for years under the protection of police badges and department politics. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Kim had said, "this case began with the courage of a 3-year-old child who was brave enough to tell the truth when the adults around her were content to look the other way." What Emma Chun witnessed in her grandmother's apartment was not just an isolated incident of animal abuse. It was a window into a systematic criminal enterprise that perverted the very foundations of justice in our community. Now, as Emma prepared to testify for the second time, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with tension. In the months since her first testimony, FBI agent Monica Reeves' investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the police department, involving not just Thompson, but Police Chief Robert Hayes, Sergeant Michael Foster, and a network of drug dealers who had been paying for protection. Defense attorney Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive criminal lawyers in California, had tried every legal maneuver to keep Emma from testifying again. He had argued that a 4-year-old could not be considered a reliable witness, that her testimony had been contaminated by months of therapy and media attention, and that subjecting a child to the trauma of testifying in a federal criminal trial constituted cruel and unusual treatment. But Judge Patricia Williams, now presiding over the federal case after it had been moved to her courtroom, had ruled decisively that Emma's testimony was crucial to the prosecution's case. The child had been the first to speak the truth, and she deserved to be heard. Dr. Foster sat in the front row, ready to provide support if Emma became overwhelmed. Beside her sat Officer Sarah Martinez, whose decision to come forward with a recording had provided the foundation for the entire federal case. Martinez had cooperated fully with the FBI investigation, wearing a wire to the meeting with Thompson, where he had attempted to coordinate false testimony. That recording, played in court just days earlier, had shown Thompson explicitly instructing Martinez and Riley to lie under oath about what they had witnessed. "Emma," Prosecutor Kim said gently, approaching the witness stand where the little girl sat with her feet dangling well above the floor. "Do you remember coming to court before to talk about the doggy?" Emma nodded seriously. "Yes, I told everyone about how the mean man hurt Rex." "And do you see that doggy anywhere in the courtroom today?" At the mention of Rex's name, Emma's face lit up with genuine joy. Near the back of the courtroom, Rex sat calmly beside his new handler, Animal Control Officer Lisa Patel. The German Shepherd had been retired from police work and was now living with a loving family, but he had been brought to court as evidence. The transformation in the dog was remarkable. Where once he had cowered and trembled around police officers, he now sat with quiet dignity, his tail occasionally wagging as he observed the proceedings. "Rex!" Emma exclaimed, pointing toward the back of the courtroom. He looks so much happier now." A collective murmur ran through the gallery. Even the hardened reporters in the media section seemed moved by the genuine affection in the child's voice. "Can you tell us what Rex looked like when you first saw him at your grandma's house?" Kim asked. Emma's expression grew serious. The way children's faces do when they're remembering something that troubled them. He was very scared. His ears were down, and he was shaking like when I get scared during thunderstorms. The mean man was yelling at him and hitting him with the black stick. Defense Attorney Webb rose from his chair. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is 4 years old and cannot possibly distinguish between normal police K-9 handling procedures and overruled," Judge Williams said firmly. "The witness may continue." Emma looked directly at Thompson, who was sitting at the defense table in a civilian suit, a stark contrast to the uniform he had worn with such pride for 8 years. "Why were you so mean to Rex?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Dogs are supposed to be our friends." Thompson's lawyer had coached him to show no emotion, to maintain his innocence through body language and demeanor. But facing the direct, innocent question from the child whose testimony had destroyed his career and exposed his crimes, Thompson's composure finally cracked. His shoulders sagged, and for just a moment, the jury saw not a defiant defendant, but a man confronted with the weight of his actions. "Emma," Prosecutor Kim continued, "after the mean man hit Rex, what did the doggy do?" "He went into Grandma's room, even though he didn't want to. He kept looking back like he was scared the man would hit him again. Then he started digging in the closet, but he wasn't happy like dogs usually are when they're playing. He was still shaking." The courtroom was completely silent as Emma described, in her simple, honest words, how Rex had been coerced into providing false evidence. Her testimony was more powerful than any expert witness or technical analysis because it came from a place of pure truth, untainted by legal strategy or political considerations. "And what did Rex find in the closet?" Kim asked. "Grandma's medicine box. But I don't think Rex really wanted to find it. I think he was just scared of getting hurt again." Those words, "I think he was just scared of getting hurt again," hung in the air like an indictment, not just of Thompson, but of a system that had allowed such abuse to continue unchecked for years. Prosecutor Kim had one final question. "Emma, is there anything else you want to tell us about Rex?" Emma looked toward the back of the courtroom, where Rex sat peacefully with Officer Patel. Then she looked at Thompson, her 4-year-old mind processing concepts of justice and forgiveness that many adults struggled to understand. "I think Rex forgives the mean man," she said quietly. "Dogs are good at forgiving, but I hope no one ever hurts him again." As Emma stepped down from the witness stand, she walked directly to the back of the courtroom where Rex was sitting. Officer Patel nodded to Judge Williams, who allowed the interaction. Emma gently petted Rex's head, and the dog's tail wagged softly as he nuzzled against her small hand. The image of the 4-year-old girl comforting the dog who had been at the center of this massive corruption case was captured by dozens of cameras and would become an iconic symbol of justice prevailing over abuse of power. Defense Attorney Webb declined to cross-examine Emma. There was nothing he could ask that wouldn't further damage his client's case. The truth, as spoken by a child, was unassailable. As court recessed for the day, Thompson sat alone at the defense table, finally understanding that his career, his freedom, and his reputation had been destroyed not by federal agents or prosecutors, but by a little girl who had simply told the truth about what she had seen. The trial would continue for 3 more weeks, but Emma Chun's testimony had already sealed Thompson's fate. Her courage had started this journey, and her continued bravery was bringing it to its inevitable conclusion. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes before returning to courtroom 3B with their verdict. In her 38 years on the federal bench, Judge Patricia Williams had rarely seen a jury reach a unanimous decision so quickly in such a complex case. But as she looked at the faces of the 12 men and women filing back into the jury box, she could see the certainty in their expressions. Emma Chun's testimony had been devastating in its simplicity and truth. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Williams asked. Jury foreman Robert Chun, no relation to Emma's family, stood with the verdict form in his trembling hands. The 72-year-old retired teacher had been visibly moved by Emma's testimony, and his voice carried the weight of justice as he spoke. We have, Your Honor. On all 17 counts against Officer Brad Thompson, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Reporters frantically typed on their phones, while Thompson's wife, sitting in the third row, broke down in tears. Thompson himself sat motionless, staring straight ahead as his attorney placed a consoling hand on his shoulder. 8 years of police service, destroyed by the honest words of a 4-year-old girl who had simply told the truth about what she witnessed. But Judge Williams knew that Thompson's conviction was only the beginning. FBI agent Monica Reeves had been working tirelessly for 6 months, following the threads of corruption that Emma's initial testimony had unraveled. As the courtroom began to settle after the verdict, Judge Williams noticed Reeves whispering urgently into her phone near the back of the room. Your Honor, Prosecutor Jennifer Kim said, rising from her chair, before we proceed to sentencing, the government has additional matters that require the court's immediate attention. Judge Williams had been expecting this moment. At Thompson, trial had been just the tip of the iceberg, and federal investigators had been working around the clock to build cases against every person involved in what had become known as the Rex conspiracy. Agent Reeves, Judge Williams said, please approach the bench. As Reeves walked forward, her face carried the grim satisfaction of someone who had spent months building an airtight case against widespread corruption. In her hand was a folder containing arrest warrants that would shock the community to its core. Your Honor, Reeves said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom, based on evidence uncovered during the Thompson investigation, including financial records, wiretapped conversations, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. The FBI has obtained federal arrest warrants for Police Chief Robert Hayes, Captain Michael Rodriguez, Sergeant Michael Foster, and Detective Mark Sullivan on charges of conspiracy, drug trafficking, money laundering, and civil rights violations. The words hit the courtroom like a bomb. Police Chief Hayes, the man who had held Thompson up as an example of modern policing, was seated in the gallery just 10 rows behind Emma and her grandmother. His face went white as Agent Reeves continued. Additionally, we have arrest warrants for drug dealer Marcus Rivera and 5 associates who are paying members of the police department for protection while using Officer Thompson's canine alerts to eliminate their competition. Judge Williams had presided over many traumatic moments in her career, but nothing had prepared her for what happened next. As if on cue, the courtroom doors burst open and a team of federal agents in tactical gear entered, moving with military precision toward specific targets throughout the gallery. Chief Robert Hayes, Agent Reeves announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, drug trafficking, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The 60-year-old police chief, who had been expecting to leave the courthouse as a respected law enforcement leader, instead found himself being handcuffed in front of the cameras he had courted throughout his career. The man who had spent 32 years building a reputation as a reformer and community leader was now facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. But the arrests didn't stop there. Captain Rodriguez, who had been sitting with other department officials, was also taken into custody. Sergeant Foster, who had been present during the original Chun search and had helped coordinate the cover-up, was arrested as he attempted to leave through a side exit. Emma Chun, sitting in the front row with her grandmother, watched the chaos with wide eyes. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could see that many of the loud men who had scared her and hurt Rex were being taken away by other police officers. "Grandma," she whispered, tugging on Mrs. Chun's sleeve. "Are the bad men going to jail now?" Mrs. Chun, tears streaming down her weathered face, hugged her granddaughter tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. The bad men are going to jail because you were brave enough to tell the truth." As the arrests continued, Agent Reeves provided Judge Williams with a summary of the investigation's findings. The conspiracy had been operating for over 3 years, generating more than $2.3 million in illegal profits. Thompson had been coercing Rex into false alerts, not just randomly, but as part of a systematic campaign to arrest competitors of a drug trafficking organization that was paying police officials for protection. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Rex's false alerts had resulted in the wrongful arrest and imprisonment of 127 innocent people. Families had been destroyed, lives ruined, and justice perverted by a criminal enterprise operating under the protection of police badges. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when Agent Reeves announced that the investigation had uncovered evidence of similar operations in 3 other counties, all connected to the same drug trafficking network. "Your Honor," Reeves said, "this investigation began with a 3-year-old girl's observation about a frightened dog. It has now expanded into the largest police corruption case in California history, with potential connections to organized crime throughout the southwestern United States." As the last of the corrupt officials was led away in handcuffs, Judge Williams called for order in her courtroom. She looked at Emma, who was still sitting quietly with her grandmother, clutching Mr. Buttons and watching everything with the innocent curiosity of a child who had unknowingly changed the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Williams announced, "this court will recess while federal authorities complete their operations. When we reconvene tomorrow, we will proceed with sentencing for Mr. Thompson." But everyone in the courtroom knew that Thompson's sentencing was now almost an afterthought. The real story was the complete dismantling of a criminal conspiracy that had operated for years under the cover of law enforcement authority. As the courtroom cleared, Emma walked over to where Rex was sitting with Officer Patel, the dog who had been at the center of this massive investigation, seemed to sense that something important had happened. When Emma petted his head, Rex's tail wagged with the contentment of an animal who is finally safe from abuse. "You're a good doggy," Emma said softly. "I'm glad nobody can hurt you anymore." Mrs. Chun, whose drug charges had been dismissed months earlier when the extent of the conspiracy became clear, was granted full custody of Emma with no legal challenges. The little girl who had exposed the biggest corruption scandal in county history would grow up knowing that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply telling the truth. Outside the courthouse, as reporters shouted questions and camera crews captured the historic moment, Emma Chun held her grandmother's hand and walked toward their car. She had no idea that her simple observation about a scared dog had brought down an entire criminal empire, freed 127 innocent people from prison, and restored faith in justice for an entire community. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest voices speaking the biggest truths. And sometimes it takes the fearless honesty of a child to remind adults what courage really looks like.